We all know that information technology has completely changed our daily lives, right? But what if its biggest impact isn't on how we shop or talk to friends, but on something as old and as brutal as war itself? Today, we're going to look at how this tech is reshaping warfare, from the battlefield to the words we use, and maybe even right into our own homes.
So for almost 200 years, this idea from the Prussian general Clausewitz has been the gold standard, that war is just an eternal, unchanging part of politics. But does that still hold up? Has all our new tech, GPS, drones, big data, has it created something fundamentally new? That's really the big question we're digging into today.
All right, so the first and most obvious change is distance. Information technology has basically stretched the battlefield out, creating these remote forms of warfare that, for some people fighting, feel almost, well, virtual.
Now, this whole shift didn't happen by accident. It was driven by this really powerful idea that popped up after the Cold War called the Revolution in Military Affairs, or RMA for short. And the strategy? It was pretty straightforward. Use technology to build a smaller, smarter, and just overwhelmingly superior military force.
And the core logic behind the RMA is just fascinating. The thinking goes something like this. If we can use technology to get rid of what Clausewitz famously called the fog of war, all the confusion and uncertainty, if you can see everything and know everything, then you can control everything. It's this dream of total battlefield awareness.
And the first big test for this new way of thinking was the 1991 Gulf War. It really became the poster child for the RMA. The US-led coalition used satellite everything, communications, GPS targeting, you name it, and they achieved this stunningly decisive victory with incredibly low coalition casualties. To a lot of people, it looked like this new way of war was a total, undeniable success.
With this new kind of war came a whole new language to describe it. Terms like spectator sport war really captured that feeling that folks back home weren't participating anymore. They were just watching it all on their TVs. And then you have virtual war, which described the experience for the actual operators, where the entire conflict could be boiled down to a series of images on a screen.
This whole thing created a really strange paradox. I mean, for a drone pilot sitting in a control station thousands of miles away, the experience might feel a lot like a simulation, right? But for the people on the receiving end of that missile strike, the consequences are anything but virtual. The reality on the ground is always visceral, it's always real.
But the distance we're talking about wasn't just physical. As we're about to see, the very words, the language used to describe this new way of fighting, well, it started to create its own kind of ethical distance too.
Okay, so scholars have a term for this, technostrategic discourse. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's a way of talking about war that's so technical, so abstract, so focused on the hardware, that it just strips the human element right out of the equation. The language itself becomes a kind of tool, a technology, for managing the messy, emotional, and ethical parts of organized violence.
The feminist scholar Carol Cohn just nailed this in her work. She argued that this super-specialized language allows military planners to talk about things like mass destruction and unbelievable suffering without ever having to really feel or confront those realities.
And if you think that sounds like just some academic theory, take a look at these. These are real-world examples. Clean bombs actually referred to more destructive fusion bombs. An attack plan was literally called a shopping list. These aren't just bits of jargon. They are designed, intentionally or not, to sanitize a horrific reality, to make the unthinkable seem somehow manageable.
But here's where the story takes a really crucial turn. This whole way of thinking, using information to manage risk from a safe distance, it was just too powerful an idea to stay confined to foreign battlefields. Especially after events like 9/11, that logic started coming home.
So yeah, this is where things get really interesting, because the principles of surveillance, data collection, and striking before something happens, all the stuff that define the RMA, were seen as so successful that they started to be applied not just to enemy fighters, but to civilian populations.
And this gave birth to something we now call data valence. It's the evolution of surveillance. Think about it. We've gone from just cameras on the street to algorithms in the cloud. Instead of just watching physical spaces, security agencies began monitoring our digital lives, combing through our financial records, our travel patterns, our online behavior, all to find potential threats before they can even happen.
And this is where it gets incredibly personal. Biometric technologies, we're talking facial recognition, fingerprint scanners, they turn our very bodies into data points. Entire populations become these massive data sets, and algorithms just sift through them to calculate our individual risk score in the same way a military target is assessed on a battlefield. It's this deep desire for a technological fix to really complex human problems.
So you see the pattern, right? The underlying logic is exactly the same. Whether it's trying to stop an ambush in a war zone or a potential attack at an airport, the goal is to use huge amounts of information to predict and neutralize threats before they happen. In a strange way, politics almost becomes the continuation of war by other means, flipping Clausewitz on his head.
So what does this all add up to? Well, it shows that information technology has just profoundly blurred all the lines we used to take for granted. The line between war and peace, between soldier and civilian, and between the battlefield and home.
So let's just quickly trace that journey again. It all started with this military strategy to create a virtual, seemingly risk-free battlefield. That strategy needed a sanitized language to take the human cost out of the equation. And finally, that exact same logic of remote surveillance and preemptive control was turned inward, on our own societies.
Which leaves us with one last, pretty big question. As these two worlds keep merging, as the tools of war become the tools of everyday security, where exactly does the battlefield end and your life begin? Thanks for thinking it through with us.